Welcome to episode 50 of the Write and Inspire Rockcast, where I talk about the science of learning. I share insights into how adults can learn safely well into old age and how we can leverage mountain biking to improve our mental health and, of course, also our physical health. Today, we're diving into something that actually happens inside your head every time you're learning something. And it's about the 3 stages of neuroplasticity and what they mean for mountain biking. I promise this is not going to be a boring science lecture. It's more of I would say, a healthy knowledge snack. And I want to explain how your brain actually rewires new skills and anything that you learn. Because here's the thing, once you understand these 3 stages, you will see why you may be missing out on something super important and how you can make learning faster, safer, and far less frustrating. Trust me, I've been there when I started learning mountain biking or learning mountain bike skills. I was already way beyond the age of 20, still young, but still, I was an adult and I had plenty of frustration myself. Okay, so before we get into the 3 stages, let's talk about what actually determines whether learning can happen at all. I like to call it the brain's learning gatekeeper, because deep inside your brain sits the amygdala. That's your emotional filter. And it constantly decides whether incoming information gets sent up to the prefrontal cortex, where focused learning and logical thinking happens, and from there also to the motor areas in your brain, or whether it sends the signal down to the survival brain, where your fight, flight, or freeze response live. So when you're feeling unsafe or anxious or judged, the amygdala interprets that as a threat, and it diverts oxygen and glucose to the lower, more reactive brain. And in that fear state, you can still move, of course, but you cannot learn. It's impossible. Your body stiffens, your vision narrows, and fine motor control shuts down. So if you're looking to learn new movements, it's not possible in that high stress fear state, because as I said, your brain doesn't send the glucose, the oxygen, to the learning areas. It sends it to the survival brain. But if the experience feels safe and is rewarding, the brain directs the glucose and blood to the prefrontal cortex, which is essential for learning. And that's why practicing that's why practicing new skills in a safe area, like in your driveway or in a parking lot or easy trails or another similar controlled area, is not that you're less brave or not trying hard enough. It's actually about setting your brain into a learning state, because fear switches learning off and safety switches learning on. Okay, that's about the brain's learning gatekeeper. So let's start with stage 1 now. I like to call it the clinic high or the tutorial high, because maybe you've been there. Well, I certainly have many, many times. I watch a YouTube tutorial or I take a skills clinic. Actually, funny, I'm learning paddle right now. Paddle is, if you don't know the sport, it's a mixture of squash and tennis. It's very popular here in Spain. And I took a 1-hour skills clinic, and so many things finally clicked. So I finally understood how movements works. I finally understood how I'm supposed to serve, how the backhand and is it forehand? I think it's forehand, how it works, what I need to do. I nailed a few drills, and it was amazing because I instantly improved and I felt like a superhero. So I was glowing. That part, that is neurochemistry. So my brain just released dopamine, acetylcholine, and those feel-good, I learned something hormones. And it's basically a cocktail, so you get high on your own supplies. And yes, I have learned something, but here's the thing. I only learned it temporarily, because without repetition, your brain, actually my brain, will soon go, okay, well, that was cool, but we're not going to spend any long-term storage on this. And that's why after that, like a week later, I went back to the court and I was like, well, wait, how am I meant to serve? What was that? So I needed to wake up those memories, because you have that burst, the chemical burst, that is stage 1. But if you don't do it often enough, the body doesn't save it. The brain doesn't actually save those connections. So after that, I thought, okay, wait, what happened? Why did I forget everything? why, like, where is all of this? I did it like last week. I was getting better last week. Why am I so bad this week? Maybe that sounds familiar. Well, that's stage one of neuroplasticity. It's that chemical burst. It's fun, it's motivating, but it's very fleeting. The brain releases neurochemicals, it's created new pathways, but these pathways are so fine that using them is more a matter of coincidence. And when you then go somewhere where you want to apply it under pressure, you cannot use it because it's not yet consolidated. So this happened to me in paddle as well. We then played with friends, and my friend said, okay, you need to stand closer to the net because that's where the balls will come and that's where you can stop them. So what happened? I needed to react quicker. And my brain wasn't prepared for this because, of course, after that clinic high, the moves were just so fleeting that I was able to do them when I thought about them, but I wasn't able to do them when I felt rushed. So everything fell apart. I wasn't hitting the balls anymore. I wasn't preparing my forehand the way I should. And I actually missed the ball a few times. And then I said to him, hey, I'm sorry. I'm going to move back again. I know, of course, like tactically, it's not clever, but I just don't feel ready. And that just happened because I know how neuroscience or how our brain works. And I know that I'm actually regressing right now rather than allowing myself to progress because I'm focusing on details too early and I am putting myself under pressure too early. So I'm getting out of the learning zone, putting myself in a performance zone, and then everything that I learned in stage one is actually falling apart. It's very common though, people do that we will learn something and we're like, okay, then I can just directly take it to the trail. Well, unfortunately, it doesn't work because we still need stage 2 and stage 3 of neuroplasticity. So now let me explain stage 2, because this is where the real work begins. So you can imagine stage 1 like building a new trail in the forest. It's exciting, right? But if you never ride it again, it just grows over with weeds. And that's exactly what happens if you don't go from stage 1 to stage 2. Because stage 2 is when you grab your shovel and you would then actually start shaping the trail regularly. So you clear the rocks, you maybe pack some dirt, and maybe like build a berm, and then you come back regularly to reinforce that berm. So in stage 2, what happens is myelination, and that is that your brain adds myelin. You can think about this like an insulation around cables. It's a fatty thread that wraps around neurons and makes signals faster and more precise. And what also happens is something called pruning. That means that your brain prunes away, takes away unhelpful connections so the signals can then flow faster because you have that insulation around the cables and you have the deviations. They're gone, so the signals can flow faster. So old habits in your brain, they're like a 4-lane highway. And the new skills you're trying to put into your brain, they're basically like faint tracks. And what you need to do with time, with repetition and myelination is to build a new 4-lane highway and let the grass grow on the old highway. But that only works if you don't use the old highway and keep using the new one until the new one is a 4-lane highway. So if you're distracted, like I was on that paddle court when everything went too fast, of course, my brain will choose the highway. So every time I'm stressed, I will use the old highway and I won't be able to deliberately use the new highway. So every time I use the old highway, what's happening? The grass isn't growing on my old highway and my new highway is getting thinner and thinner. And that's why it's so important to have time and feel safe during practice sessions, because only through repetition without destruction does that little new trail get wider, smoother, and eventually fun to ride. So only consistent and deliberate practice in a safe zone with enough time will turn that little track into a stable route. And this is where many riders give up, honestly, because at this stage, progress does feel slow and repetition often isn't glamorous because, they get it once and they're like, oh, okay, I got it. Well, no, just because you got it once doesn't mean you can actually perform it. It just means that you got lucky once because you had that chemical burst. And yes, maybe the chemical burst went through those synapses a few times, but you haven't built enough myelin around them. And that's important because you need stage 2, the repetition and the myelination, because that's where the confidence and the skills actually form. And confidence isn't magic. Skills aren't magic. They're just myelination. Because confidence is simply built on data and repetition. The more you do something, the more automatic it becomes, the more confident become. So just to give you a timeline and explain why I don't actually give single-day clinics anymore, because I noticed that it's just so little of what's possible. And that's why I founded the online coaching platform where actually this is possible, because stage 2 is the most important stage. It takes several weeks to months to sometimes even years if you're trying to reach absolute expertise. But for most riders at a decent level, it's about 20 hours of practice with sleep in between that will give you a very, very high level of a skill. Okay, so we've gone through stage 1, gone through stage 2, and now comes stage 3. And that's actually the structural change and automatization. In this stage of neuroplasticity, this is where your brain goes through functional shifts. So this is when a skill goes from thinking hard, thinking about it, taking time. That's when it transforms to autopilot. So on the trail, stage 1 would be like, oh, I hope I remembered what the coach said here. And stage 3 will be like, you don't even think about it. Your body just does it. Even when you're tired, even when you're scared, even when you're surprised. So for me with paddle in stage 3, if I now take enough time to practice, will be I'm standing at the front, the ball is coming to me at an incredible speed, and I'll be able to perform a really great, for example, backhand and throw the ball exactly where I wanted without thinking about it. So stage 1 is technically knowing what to do, but freezing when I am placed too close to the net. And stage 3 is that technique just comes automatic. I just answer the serve smoothly. And in mountain biking terms, it would be that technical chunky corner you once feared and you've always walked. Well, you just cleared it smoothly and you have no idea how. So in stage 3, after enough repetition and rest, which you do in stage 2, your brain then undergoes structural change. So the motor cortex, the cerebellum, and the basal ganglion reorganize itself so that the movement becomes automatic and you don't have to think about it anymore. Just like now when you're walking, you can talk, or you can listen to music, or you can scroll on your mobile phone. You don't have to think about your feet one foot after the other because it's automatic. You're in that stage 3. So when skills are fully wired, they run through those deep, efficient neural loops that don't rely on conscious thought anymore. And that's why experienced riders can stay calm when things get super wild, because their brains aren't searching for instructions. They're executing patterns that are already deeply wired. Remember, I talked about that 4-lane highway before. That's when the 4-lane highway is super, super smooth. And the old habits, the old highway, is now fully grown over with grass. So before we continue, if you find my podcast helpful, you can support it by buying me a coffee or becoming a patron. And if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, it would mean the world if you leave a quick rating or a short review, because it does help other riders discover the show, and it tells the algorithm that mountain bike skills, mindset, and science-based learning deserve a place on people's playlists. And of course, do share it with another rider, because together we can make this sport safer. Okay, next I want to address why fear and premature progression shut down learning. Remember I said I was placed too close to the net and I was doing everything wrong. So the same happens with mountain biking. If you go to technical or too exposed terrain too soon, your amygdala interprets the situation as a threat. So the moment fear spikes, your brain reroutes energy, glucose, electrical impulses, and neurotransmitters, as well as oxygen, from the prefrontal cortex to the survival centers. This is when your fine motor control, your timing, and your body awareness simply drops. And now, instead of reinforcing correct technique, you're wiring in defensive habits, like, for example, overbraking, or freezing, or stiffening, or like me on the paddle court, like doing really weird moves with my wrist instead of keeping the wrist strong and throwing the balls back in a controlled way. And that's why early exposure to difficult trails, or to me, too close to the net, without a solid base, will slow progress. And they will make unhelpful reflexes automatic through repetition, because if you're repeating something that you don't want to actually automatize, myelination will occur right there. So you will myelinate the habits you're not trying to myelinate. And then stage 2 will happen with the habits you don't want to learn. So the defensive habits. And that's why it's so important to stay in a safe learning zone long enough, repeating the drills you actually want to repeat, you actually want to ingrain with a clean form in order to make them automatic. Here's the final takeaway. A clinic or a tutorial will light the spark. That's stage 1. Then structure repetition builds the pathway. That's stage 2. And repetition over time and with progressive challenges makes it automatic. And that's what makes it trail proof. That's when the brain actually changes structurally for everything to run on autopilot. And none of this happens in fear mode. So you do not need to be out on the trails scaring yourself into bravery. It does not work. You need to build these patterns in a safe zone. Learning happens when you feel safe, when you feel curious, when you're slightly challenged because you have that clear technique goal. That's the sweet spot where dopamine flows and your brain says, yes, this is worth keeping. And that's exactly what I built my online coaching platform on. If you would like to try a free course this way, then check the description below this podcast, because this is where you can start safely right in front of your doorstep. So next time you leave a clinic feeling like a superhero, enjoy the high, seriously. But remember, it's just the start. It's the spark. It's stage 1. Real courage, real control, and real joy on the trail comes when you pick up that shovel and when you build that new highway in your brain. And you need repetition for that and sleep to turn it into autopilot. You need a clear goal. You need feedback with time. And that's when your brain can do what it's designed to do, can rewire itself for mastery. So thank you for tuning in today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Leave me a comment and ride safe, and I'll see you again, hopefully in stage 3 of neuroplasticity in the next episode.